Eastern Avenue Industrial District, Toronto, November 1949, 11:20 at night. Constable Walter Reese, Toronto Police, 14th year on the same night beat, stood at the corner under the last working street lamp and listened to the street before he moved into it. In 10 minutes, the metal stamping plant 2 blocks east would let out its night shift, and for a quarter of an hour, the dark street would fill and then empty again. And Reese knew the exact shape of that 15 minutes. Which gate opened first, which men turned toward the streetcar stop, and which toward the all-night lunch counter, and what the street sounded like when the 15 minutes went the way it always went. A patrol car passed him at low speed, its radio aerial catching the lamplight. The driver raised 2 fingers off the wheel. Reese raised his hand back. 2 policing systems occupied the same wet street that night, and they did not know the street in the same way. The car carried a receiver that connected it to the station. Reese carried 14 years. At the corner behind him stood the 3rd system, the oldest one, a police call box, painted metal on an iron post, wired into the city since before either man was born. When the station needed the man on this beat, a red light on that box would flash. 1 flash, coded for the beat constable. Reese checked it by habit every time he passed, the way he checked the watchman's lamp in the cooperage window across the street, because the lamp being lit at 11:20 was normal, and the lamp being dark was information. This is a video about how the night streets of Toronto and Montreal were patrolled between 1930 and 1970, on foot, on horseback, on motorcycles, and finally from cars, and about what the arrival of the radio car changed. But before the radio, there was a complete system running the night in both cities, and it ran on 2 things: coded electric light and what the man on the beat carried in his head. What was that system, and what, exactly, did it require Constable Reese to know? The system Constable Reese worked inside was already old. Toronto had wired 60 electric call boxes into its streets in 1888. Each box carried a gong and a flashing red light, and the light spoke in code. 1 flash meant the call was for the constable on that beat. 2 flashes meant information for all officers. 3 meant emergency. That was the entire bandwidth of the night. 1, 2, or 3 flashes. Everything else the institution wanted to say to a man on the street had to wait until he opened the box and picked up the wire. The vehicles layered themselves on top of that wire over 40 years. A full-time mounted unit had existed since 1886, put into the outlying districts where police were rarely seen. In 1911, the force moved from bicycles to motorcycles, and in 1917, the first Ford patrol cars entered service. Montreal ran the same sequence on its own clock. Police cars from 1914, and in the interwar years a traffic section equipped with motorcycles. But into the 1940s, in both cities, the vehicle was a supervision and response tool. The knowledge tool was still the man on foot. The car could reach a street quickly. It could not tell you what the street was supposed to look like when it got there. Understand what this meant operationally. Between call boxes, a night constable was invisible to his own institution. His sergeant knew his box schedule, where he should ring in, and when. If he missed a ring, someone came looking. That was the whole tracking system. Everything that happened between the boxes was managed by 1 resource only. What the constable knew about 6 blocks of Night Street, accumulated 1 shift at a time. Before we continue, if this kind of documentation is what you have been looking for, consider subscribing. Every video on this channel goes into one specific element of Canadian patrol between 1900 and 1980. The vehicle, the posting, the territory knowledge that years in one place built in the officer who walked the same 6 blocks in 4 seasons, and the communities those officers served, in the full complexity of what that service meant in this era. Not Mountie mythology, the documented operational and human reality of patrol in a country whose geography and whose night cities required officers to know their territory the way no centralized system has ever been asked to know it. What did 14 years on 1 Toronto night beat give Constable Reese about 6 blocks of Industrial Street that no dispatch map and no radio channel has ever been designed to hold? And if you served in a Canadian police force in this era, or your family did, put it in the comments. If your father or grandfather walked a night beat in Toronto or Montreal, or drove one of the first radio cars, which streets were his, and what did he say about the night the radio arrived? A coming video follows the RCMP grid road detachments, the prairie corporal who read blowing snow the way this constable read a factory gate. Back on the night street, the box could pass 1, 2, or 3 flashes. Everything else had to already be in the constable. What was that everything else? What were the 3 kinds of knowledge that no flash code, and later no radio call, ever contained? The first thing was the shift map. Reese's 6 blocks did not have one population. They had a schedule of populations. The stamping plant let out at 11:30. The tannery at midnight. The freight shed crews came on at 1. Each gate had its own crowd, its own route to the streetcar, its own lunch counter, and its own sound. A street full of men at 11:35 was normal. The same street full of men at 12:50 was a question. No call box could flash that distinction. And later, no dispatcher reading a district map would possess it. Rees possessed it because he had stood in it roughly 4,000 times. The second thing was the people. The night population of an industrial district is small and it repeats. The watchmen, the boilermen who kept steam up overnight, the counterman at the all-night lunch stand, the caretakers, the men who slept rough near the rail spur in the warm months. Rees knew them the way a long-posted RCMP corporal knew his farm families, by name, by habit, and by baseline. The watchman's lamp in the cooperage window was lit by 10 o'clock every night, because the watchman lit it when his first round finished. A dark window at 11:20 was not a crime. It was a deviation from a baseline that existed nowhere except in the constable who had walked past that window for 14 years. The third thing was the deviation sense itself, the trained comparison between the street as it was and the street as it should be, at this hour, in this weather, on this night of the week. This was not intuition. It was a data set, built one shift at a time, held in one place, the man. Before radio, an officer on his beat could reach his command only through the box or the telephone, which meant the institution had, in effect, outsourced the entire situational awareness of the night city to the memory of its beat constables, and it had never written any of it down. Toronto's grid ran one kind of night, industrial, scheduled, Protestant quiet by law after the taverns closed. 400 miles east, Montreal ran another kind entirely, a port city whose night did not close. What did the Montreal night constable's territory demand of him that Reese's 6 blocks never asked? Rue Wellington toward the harbor, Montreal, October 1946, 1 in the morning. Constable Émile Bergeron, Montreal Police, 9th year in the same port district, walked the block between a longshoreman's tavern that was closed and a club 2 streets north that was not, and the difference between those two facts was most of what his territory demanded of him. Montreal's night patrol was older than Montreal's police force. In the era before the force existed, merchants had paid for a body of 22 watchmen who patrolled from 7 at night until 5 in the morning, calling the hours into the dark. The city's first patrolmen were night patrolmen, created because the night was where the city's commerce was exposed. A century later, the structure of the problem was unchanged, and its scale was enormous. The harbor, the freight sheds, the rail yards behind the great downtown stations, the East End factories, and threaded through all of it, a night economy that Toronto did not have. Montreal was a port city that had profited through Prohibition, when alcohol sales were banned in the United States, and much of Canada, a city where clubs, gambling rooms, and after-hours drinking spots ran deep into the morning, decade after decade, with a durability that later inquiry would explain. Modernization had come in waves. A royal commission in 1909 had forced a reorganization of the whole department. Police cars had arrived in 1914, and the interwar years brought a motorcycle traffic section and something Toronto's beat men did not yet have, the launch of the Montreal Police Radio. But at 1 in the morning on Rue Wellington in 1946, the radio lived in cars and buildings, not in the greatcoat of the man walking the block. What Bergeron carried was the same thing Rees carried, tuned to a different night, which doors were open past legal hours and had been open past legal hours for years, which ship was working cargo tonight, and what a crew paid off at midnight did to the tavern's edges, which streets the rail yard men crossed and when. His deviation sense had to run in a city where a great deal of the night was, on paper, already a deviation, and had been one for so long that it functioned as the baseline. That sentence should stop you. A night territory where illegal hours were the stable, known, expected condition of the street, known to the man on the beat, and, as a judicial inquiry would soon document in exhaustive detail, known considerably higher up than the man on the beat. The beat constable's knowledge of the night was genuine and operational in Montreal, exactly as it was in Toronto. But in both cities, the institution that knowledge served was itself a specific actor in these decades, on the picket lines, in the political meetings, in the protection ledgers. Before the radio car can arrive in this story, that context has to be on the record. What, honestly documented, were these two forces doing with their night streets between 1930 and 1950? The Toronto force that Constable Reese served had spent the 1930s under Chief Constable Dennis Draper, a retired brigadier general who ran the department from 1928 to 1946. Under Draper, the force operated what it openly called a Red Squad, which broke up demonstrations by trade unions, by the unemployed, and by the homeless through the worst years of the Depression, and did it with truncheons. Mounted officers, nicknamed Draper's Dragoons, charged crowds at open-air meetings at Queen's Park. In 1929, the city, with police backing, moved against public meetings held in languages other than English, a measure aimed directly at the immigrant neighborhoods whose factory gates the night beats watched. The same mounted unit that did steady, unglamorous night work in the outlying districts was the unit that rode into those crowds. The same institution, the same decade, often the same men. Montreal's record ran differently and just as deep. The protection system around the city's night economy, the gambling houses and brothels that operated for years with a stability no honest enforcement could have permitted, was documented under oath when the Karen inquiry sat from 1950 to 1953. Following the campaign of Pacifique Pax Plant, the former head of the morality squad whose newspaper articles had laid the system open. What the inquiry established was that the night Bergeron walked was not merely tolerated by inattention. Parts of it were administered. The beat constable's knowledge of which doors stayed open was real knowledge. The reason the doors stayed open ran through his own department. This channel states both records plainly, because both are the truth of the same streets. The operational knowledge of the night beat, the shift maps, the watchman's lamps, the deviation sense, was genuine, and it was held by working constables, most of whom spent their careers on exactly that work. And the institutions those constables served were, in these same decades, instruments used against strikers, against immigrants' public speech, and, in Montreal, woven into the corruption their own morality squad finally exposed. Neither fact cancels the other. Both are the context of every night street in this video. Into this world, the coded flash, the walking data set, the compromised and indispensable institution, came the radio. Detroit had made one-way radio to patrol cars work in 1928. What happened when that signal reached Toronto and Montreal? And what did the first voice inside a patrol car actually change? The signal came from Detroit first. In 1928, after years of failed experiments across North America, the Detroit police made one-way radio to patrol cars work reliably. Headquarters could speak, the car could only listen. And the system built there became the basis for police radio across the continent. Two-way sets followed from 1933, and it was in the 1940s that two-way radio spread widely through patrol fleets. Montreal had put a police radio service on the air in the interwar years. Toronto's cars carried receivers and then transmitters through the 1940s. By the time Constable Reese raised his hand to the passing car in 1949, the car could not only be sent, it could answer. Understand precisely what this changed. Before radio, the institution's reach into the night ended at the call box. A message waited at a fixed point until a man walked to it. With radio, the message traveled to the man, provided the man was in a car. Response ceased to be a geography of boxes and became a geography of vehicles. A dispatcher with a district map and a radio log could now do something no sergeant at a signal board had ever done. Move the night around like pieces, in real time, from a room. And note what the radio message actually contained: an address, an occurrence type, a time. It was the call box's 3 flashes with more words, and it still carried none of the 3 kinds of knowledge that lived in Reese. The radio could tell a car that there was trouble at the cooperage. It could not tell the car that the watchman's lamp had been dark for an hour, because no one in the dispatch room knew the lamp existed. The radio did not kill the beat. The car did that. and a decision made in 1957 accelerated it. What happened when Toronto amalgamated its policing? And what did the windshield do to the knowing of a street? In 1957, Toronto's policing was amalgamated into the Metropolitan Toronto Police. The city force and the surrounding municipal forces folded into a single organization covering the whole metropolitan area. It was the urban equivalent of the RCMP's detachment consolidations. Fewer, larger commands, standardized fleets, officers deployable anywhere in the metro. The four-door patrol car became the basic unit of coverage, and coverage was the word that mattered. A car could pass through 6 blocks in 90 seconds. A beatman took an hour and a half, and that difference was counted entirely in the car's favor, because the thing the beatman did with the extra 88 minutes had never been written into any ledger the institution audited. Call it the windshield distance. From a moving car, the street arrives as image. The lit window, the parked truck, the man in the doorway. Each seen once, at speed, without baseline. Reese at walking pace heard the boiler house steam, knew the truck belonged to the night fitter, knew the man in the doorway, and what doorway he should have been in. The car multiplied the territory an officer could cover, and divided what he could know about any block of it. And because radio-directed cars went where the dispatcher sent them, the officer's night stopped being a route through his own data set and became a sequence of addresses chosen by a room downtown. The 1960s completed the circuit. Portable radios put the wire into the officer's coat at last, and the walking beats that survived were finally reachable everywhere. At the exact moment the institution was deciding it needed far fewer of them. Montreal ran the same arithmetic through the same decade. By 1970, the transformation was structural in both cities. So stand in the dispatch room around 1970 and look at the night city from there. What could it see, and what, on the streets Reese and Bergeron had walked, could no one see anymore? From the dispatch room around 1970, the night city was legible as it had never been. Every unit on the air, every call logged and timed, response measured in minutes across a metropolitan map. It was a genuine achievement, and this channel does not pretend otherwise. A citizen with a telephone could summon help faster than at any time in either city's history. What the room could not see was everything the beat had known. The shift maps, the watchman's lamps, the baselines of 4,000 nights. None of it had been recorded, because none of it had ever been recognized as an institutional asset. It had been treated as the private habit of walking men, and when the walking men retired, it retired with them, one career at a time, without a single debriefing. If this channel is going to keep documenting what Canadian patrol officers knew about their territories and what it cost the institution when that knowledge left, subscribe. There are more grid roads, more northern detachments, more night beats with 3 kinds of knowledge no dispatch card ever contained, and none of it was ever asked to write itself down. What did 14 years on one night beat give a Toronto constable about 6 blocks of Industrial Street that no dispatch map and no radio channel has ever been designed to hold? And if you have a beat, a division, a radio car, a night street, put it in the comments. If someone in your family walked Toronto or Montreal at night in these decades, which blocks were theirs? And what did they say when the beats ended? Next on this channel, the RCMP Grid Road Detachments, the Prairie Corporal who read blowing snow the way these constables read a factory gate. Constables like Walter Reese went off the night beats for the last time in the early 1960s, in both cities, by the hundreds. The divisions they left were consolidated. The beats were absorbed into car zones. The boxes came off the posts. What the car and the radio gave the institution: speed, coverage, a night city visible from one room. What they did not give the street: anyone who knew that the lamp in the cooperage window was supposed to be lit by 10. The stamping plant let its shift out at 11:30 for years afterward. The street filled and emptied the way it always had. The map had not changed. The knowledge was somewhere else now.